Well, I wanted to talk to you all about water holes. You know, water holes are great setup for most properties, and they've been amazing. Last year I shot a buck we called And One. He was right in and around that water hole, and he was a regular visitor of that water hole during the daylight. And what you find is we have our food plots, we have some hunting plots. Out of the 12, 13 food plots that we have in Coon Valley, Wisconsin, out here in Minnesota, then we have 3 of those that we can actually sit with and hunt with a bow. And so we have those close setups. The food plots are so critical because they're bringing deer, they're establishing that pattern of use. They're feeding on those food plots every afternoon in and around dark, right at dark, right before dark. The doe is typically 45 minutes, an hour before dark. And so they have to be close. And when they're close, that means we can control that herd, because the mature bucks, does, fawns, they have a very short window. Does and fawns might move 200 yards at the most during the daylight, and a buck might move 200 to 400 yards in most setups. So if you have that afternoon food source, they're not going to stray very far from that. And if they're hitting it in and around daylight, that means that they're close. But it's easy to spook out those food plots. Those deer are there for an hour, 45 minutes, a half hour. Even our small hunting plots, they might be at for 15, 20 minutes. So you have to be very careful, and that's why we don't have a lot of bow hunting setups. But when it comes to water holes can be a very high attraction, hot spot for bow hunting, but it's just a short window of movement. Buck comes by, he drinks that water, he's here for a half a minute, he might check out some scent from does left in the area, but by and large, he's there for a very brief amount of time, and then he's just simply moving on. So that makes a water hole a great setup, because less likely you're spooking a deer when it comes in, and it's a really high attraction location. And so we've been using water holes since the early 2000s. For over 20 years, been using water holes to great success with varying degrees. Now, we have a setup for here. I like setting up water holes. This is really important. People ask all the time. They'll send me a 3-paragraph email or a comment, which I can't respond to. I wish I had time to. Of their setup, and would it be a good spot for a water hole? Well, really it boils down to if the deer are bedded dry, or they're moving between dry bedding areas, and it's dry on the way to their afternoon food source, either one of those taking places or both, then it's an appropriate spot. For example, if deer are bedded out on this point and they're heading to ag fields this way, and it's dry between their bedding area here and that ag field, then it's an appropriate spot, even if there's water 100 yards beyond their bedding area and down into the gorge, because they don't want to go down all the way, hit water, and come all the way back up and go to their afternoon food source. That's why we offer a water hole in this location. So if you think about your land, even if you have a giant swamp on your neighbor's land or a pond, for one, most deer aren't going out to your bass pond that you have behind your cabin during the daylight as part of their cruising movement. But they are going from bedding, dry movement, dry bedding, on the way to their afternoon food source, and they'll hit that water hole very predictably. So that's where we're using them a lot of times, in between bedding areas. They're dry movement. So just think dry movement, you're adding water. Obviously, you're not adding water where they're stopping by a creek to drink on the way to an afternoon food source. So think about that. So in this location, we have dry bedding around here. We have some steep ravines, but there's no water in the bottom. We have bedding there. We have bedding over here. We have a cornfield in the distance over here that we're just adding. We have green food plots up here with corn. That cornfield actually has a little bit of green in it too. We have a green hunting plot beyond the corn and green. So we have a lot of food right here in this overall movement in this location. We've talked about this spot before, so the perfect spot for a water hole. We actually are taking the water out of this point over here because that's just pure bedding. We have a mock scrape in front of the stand. We have a mock scrape in front of every stand. But water needs to be separated a little bit more. I would say for every 40 acres, if you have extreme elevation change, 400 or 500 feet in elevation, which is huge, or more, then it might be even that you have 4 water holes, too high, too low. They're a quarter mile apart, 400, 350 yards apart up top, and the same with down below. And a lot of times we'll see bucks relate to certain elevations and not the other. They'll be high, they'll be low. Maybe they'll be on one side versus the other. But bottom line is, they're usually only taking over a corner, a top, a bottom of that property. Now, on a flat 40-acre parcel, you might only see 2 to 3 water holes at the most. just because the more you have, less likely deer are going to be to use them because they have water everywhere. And it's the same with mock scrapes. We only put a mock scrape in front of our stand locations, whether it's a gun season or a bow stand location in the woods. We have one per stand location, and that means the value of every bow stand or every mock scrape is very high. You know, this old thinking, people would put 200 mock scrapes in the property that you'd have more bucks. More scrapes don't attract more bucks. They just dilute the value of one scrape overall. So we want a very high value at our scrapes and certainly our water holes. So water holes are, you can't multiply that out by 40 acres, meaning that if you have 3 on 40 acres, you have 30 on 400 acres. You can't do that. Instead, 200 acres, you might have 5 or 6, 7 water holes. 500 acres, maybe you have 10 water holes. But you don't have the same amount per acre going forward. You want the value to be maintained at a high level. If you think water holes every 300 yards, 400 yards, that's about right. And again, you can push that envelope a little bit if you have extreme elevation change in your location. When you have a larger property like 200, 300, 400 acres, I like to spread those out even more, 400 or 500 yards. So again, the value is very high for each one, with the thought that even if you have a lot of acres, you still only have a certain number of mature bucks in the area. And you're just looking at capitalizing that daytime movement. So right here, we have a steep ravine crossing right over here. We have bedding area that way. We have the nearest water holes about 500 yards that way. We also have the cornfield / green plot, corn and green right up here. So we have a lot going on. We have bedding out here. We have our ridgetop bedding we made with switchgrass and hinge cuts. We talked about that in another video. So hope that makes sense for how many water holes you have, why you might use them on your property or not. Again, if deer are crossing through water to get to your stand location, very unlikely you need a water hole. We've gone through a major shift over the years in the size of the water holes that we have. This is a 300-gallon Rubbermaid container. And as you can imagine, they cost a little bit more. This one I just picked up for about $270. Now, the good thing is we've never had one of these break. You've never had them crack, and we've had some in the ground for 20 years now. So this one is 300 gallons. Last year we used some 150-gallon tanks. They were really good. What I like about them is, of course, they hold water, they collect water for a lot longer period of time, but deer can actually step inside of them. When we get down to, Rubbermaid makes one that's 100 gallons. It's 24 inches high, but 100 gallons. This one's 25 inches, but it's 300 gallons. So still the same depth or close to it, in a lot broader top. The 150 gallon has a really nice broad top and it's 25 gallons high. So the 150 gallon is basically about like this. They just doubled the size to give you 300 gallons. There's a 110 gallon tank I like out there that is from TSC. It's a off-brand. They're about 22 inches high. So think about that, 22 inches high, 110 gallons versus 100 gallons and 25 inches high. That top seems to get a lot more narrow. It just seems like deer really like these broader tops. And then what we're doing with this is we'll actually take, we have a mini excavator that will be used, and we'll bury this completely. So it's actually below ground level. You can see we had a rain last night. Look how much is filled up with one rain down in here. There's just a lot of water was able to capture in here. We had a load of rain that came through. We'll actually come in here and fill it. We're making a lane to come in. So that's how we're going to install this water hole. Always want it below ground level. Now, if you're in a fantasy land state, you know, again, Iowa, 65,000 bow hunters, Kansas, 25,000 bow hunters, Michigan at one time, 450,000 bow hunters. Big difference in the amount of pressure applied in these states. That's why I refer to them as fantasy land states, because you can get away with more. Expectations are more. When I go to a client in Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, even portions of Nebraska, even sometimes South Dakota, North Dakota, Kentucky, some of these great whitetail states, we're looking at, they have a lot of 150, 60 inch bucks around. They want to make sure they connect in those 180 to 200 plus every single year. People think, well, a 200 inch deer is this crazy animal that's a once in 100,000 deer, 100,000 bucks, whatever the number is. I've literally had clients in certain states, Kentucky, Ohio, portions of Illinois, where they'll see a 200-inch deer every single year. I've had one client for 15 years, they've seen a 200-inch plus, and some years multiple 200-inch animals. So yes, they are rare, they are odd, but it just depends on the area. What's 170 inches in one area, and that's a great deer and very, very rare. What's 130 inches in another area is equal to someone else's 200-inch. I hope that makes sense. It's all relative. So when we're talking inches, who really cares? We're talking age, that's more reflective. But when we're looking at water holes and we want to capture that oldest age class in your area, whatever it may be, again, it's all relative, then we want to make sure that we have a very low impact setup. What's a low impact setup when it comes to water holes? It means burying it below ground level. If you're in one of those fantasy land states, you can tune out. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can stick the water hole right on top, as long as it's legal in your state, and enjoy some success, because they're not used to that overall hunting pressure. They're not used to seeing these big blocky shapes and being scared of them in those areas. Not all areas within there, because there's certainly areas of Kentucky that have high pressure, areas of Iowa, Kansas that have high pressure, but overall just hunter numbers dictate that the hunting pressure is not the same in some states, and so that means you can do something different in those. You don't have to do things as scent free, as low impact as you do in other areas like, say, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, portions of Ohio, just because of the overall amount of hunting numbers. So here we'll bury this low level, and what I like about this 300-gallon tank is we don't have to fill it as often. It doesn't matter if it's only an inch or two deep down there in the bottom. The deer can actually come in, they can use it. They can actually get down in this depth of water during time when they're rutting and they're heated up and they want to get in here and cool off. So we're setting this up low impact. We talked about the number of water holes, the size of the water holes. You know, we started with a 55-gallon tank. We cut it in half. That was 20-some years ago, and we found that we had to fill them in 10 days. They were out of water in a dry spell, so that wasn't really, real useful, especially as absentee lease land hunters or landowners where we had to travel 6 or 7 hours to get there. It just wasn't feasible, because once the deer, if they get used to stopping by and hitting this water during the season and it runs out for a couple weeks, they're just not going to come back for a long time. It takes a long time to reestablish that pattern that this water here, we can just come through there and get it. And that's kind of why we're adding these within natural deer movements, crossing, bedding, food, everything comes together right here in a really good funnel. 27.5 gallons, not enough. 60 gallons, 50 gallons, not enough. Some years, you get away with it. But I want to count at it all the time. Last year we had to fill our water holes about 3 times during the hunting season because it was so dry. They're such a high attraction area that we want to make sure they're full and they're continuing that movement. And it's not only here. If they're coming through here predictably, they're going over to that bedding area where we have another stand we can access for morning for those deer coming back. Like if the food plot, if it runs out there in September, October, November, and it's not a good attraction, then this whole area, the deer will go somewhere else and feed. That food drives their daily pattern in the afternoon. The water holes define actually where they move if they're already here within those patterns. So if you don't have deer in your area, put a water hole there, it's not going to attract more deer to your area like a food source will, like a food plot. It'll just define movement, same with a mock scrape. It's not going to attract more deer to your land. It's only going to define movement, help to define movement. So we're going to put a mock scrape and a water hole in this location. We actually will have a mock scrape hanging off this branch right here, right over the trail. I put the water hole off to the side of the trail. We'll have a camera right back here, shining right in the mock scrape, and then the water hole in the background. So we'll get to see deer whether they come in to either one. It's interesting, we'll find the water holes are hitting mid-October when the rut starts to kick up, especially morning, daytime use. You see the bucks starting to hit them quite regularly. They'll hit them in December when they can't find a lot of water out there. There's not a lot of green vegetation for them, but they'll especially hit these during the rut. It's interesting, they'll hit that mock scrape more reliably for the entire hunting season, but it's not as high of attraction. Again, it's just defining movement when they come through. Now you see our tree stand right behind me. We have an oak right behind me. It's about 20 yards to the water hole. It'll be about 25, 26 yards to the mock scrape. And then we'll come in from the side, and then right out here we have a big switchgrass field. Switchgrass right here, it's new this year. It'll be 2-3 feet tall by hunting season. And it'll be thick. It'll provide some cover, and next year it'll be 6-7 feet tall. Bottom line is we're coming in low impact, just right down to this spot. We're not walking through any food to get here, And I hope those details make sense to you, why we're putting water here. Again, we started out with 27.5 gallons, not good enough. 100 gallons is okay. 150 gallons last year is better, but for about $80 more, we chose to go with the 300-gallon tank. We're already getting a machine in here to put these in anyways. We haven't shoveled one in for 3 or 4 years. We used to shovel them all in. Big pain in the butt. Pickaxe, axes to chop roots out. You hit a rock, then all of a sudden you have to move your hole. And in this way, it's a little bit more defined that we can count on coming in here and getting a water hole in here someday. This would be a great spot. Could be it's even summertime and it's really hot, and the camera tells us the mature buck's coming through here. Or it could simply be that we're waiting until that mid-October time. We're gonna be able to hunt this stand morning or evening, and I can't wait to bring this whole setup to you because it's all coming together. We chose to step up to the 300 gallons. I'm not saying that the 110s and 150s aren't good. We're still gonna keep all those in the property, but we're excited to try out this new size. And you always have to add a critter stick to these. That's so the little rodents can get out, squirrels, mice, chipmunks, so they don't die in here. What we're doing different is we have some concrete blocks, building blocks. We'll put those blocks in here, and in that lower hole, we'll jam that stick through there so it keeps in one spot. I don't like those sticks to stick out very far because deer can hit them, pop them out. So we'll put that stick so it just sets out right to here. We'll jam it in that concrete and make sure that it stays down. And that way it's not very intrusive. We'll put it off to one side a little bit so deer can still get in and out and cool off if they want to. But we're gonna look forward to this. I don't like the kiddie pools, some of those, because they get so shallow and flat. There's a lot of surface area. That means there's more evaporation. The more surface area you have compared to the overall depth, that's a bad thing. So here we're still at that 25 inches of depth. It'll still hold, and we're always trying to keep it in the shade too. That way you don't get that evaporation and lose water when you don't want to. One thing you'll also notice in our water holes is, we level this out, whether we're using a shovel, a mini excavator, skid steer, however these are put in. A good friend of mine, Brian Lenneman, helped us put a few of these in last year with a skid steer. But after you have that big dirt patch around here, we're seeding it with a shady trail mix, including some clover, some rye, annual rye, or perennial rye, almost like a rye grass, because we just want that soil to hold. We want it to be grass and green and pretty around here. And what spreads EHD is the midge that lives in the cracked and dry and receding water of natural mud holes in the woods. So when you have a tank like this, there's no mud. If we're putting grass all around here, there's no mud. So there's no reason to actually spread the midge or EHD with these water holes compared to even a natural water hole in the woods. So we don't take any measures to get the mosquitoes out of here. We don't add anything to the water, never do that. There's companies out there that sell you something. It's almost, it's selling you something you don't need. It's just trying to suck dollars out of you. Mosquitoes in here, nasty, mucky, smelly water. That's what deer like the most. And, but again, make sure you seed this and get it looking nice and green and pretty. And you'll help, to me, makes sense. You'll help ward off the EHD because they have to live, that midge has to live in that receding water and those cracks in the mud. And we're not producing any mud with a setup like this. So enjoy your water hole setups this year. I hope this makes sense with why we're putting this here and how we're going to come in and hunt this. And we'll try to bring it to you this fall because we can't wait to sit here, let alone bring it to you in our YouTube video in the future. Now I'm excited again this year to host our Camp Kicking Bear charity event. Last year we did it in June and it was a big success. We were able to raise over $21,000 for Camp Kicking Bear. There's some people that actually made comments that they get sick of hearing about this kind of stuff and whatever else. I think they didn't understand that we're actually raising money. This Camp Kicking Bear is, to me, the #1 children's organization that gets kids in the outdoors, their families, especially a lot of kids that don't have the opportunity to do so otherwise. June 11th, I'll have more details coming out about this, but you can email us for early registration. June 11th, it'd be midday, like 11 to 4 type thing, 10 to 5, 10 to 4. What I do is there's 50 people that register for this. We give that all to Camp Kicking Bear. Well, it's a habitat day. We go out for a couple hours on the property and I show you some strategies that you can take home to your own land. Number 3, we have a hunt raffle for 100 people. The registration for 50 people is $300. That gets you in the door to actually see the property and the land. $100 gets you in a hunt raffle times 100 people. We had Leo from Lower Michigan had a hunt last year, many memories, end of September for a couple days. Number 4, Lots of door prizes, Matthews bows, blinds. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we give away, really good stuff for you too. Kids are free. I think we had about 25, 30 kids last year. All proceeds, again, go to Kicking Bear. Every dollar, every dime we raise goes to Kicking Bear. We'll have some other auction. Last year, Chris B came. We might have Kevin Smith, retired Major League Baseball player. I hear that Gary Suter, he's a NHL Hall of Famer. He might show up too. So there's some chance to meet there. And then, of course, Ray Howell. He was here last year. He delivered his testimony. It was an awesome, inspirational talk that he gave to everyone. Hope to see you there. Look for further details on the site and then the description for the video.